Hi, I'm Angela. I have a husband with bipolar 2 disorder, my kids have ADHD, and I myself have struggled with depression. You're not alone. So Troy Pound is with us today. He's a licensed mental health counselor in Washington at Real Life Counseling, and he also has his own practice in Forest Grove, Oregon, where he is a pastor at Crossing Fellowship. I am so happy to have you here today on our Zoom series, Troy. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, so today we're going to be talking about healing through the discovery of truth. Over the past year, we've all faced a lot of challenges, and I think one of the biggest challenges that we face is really knowing the truth from a lie. So the media makes it challenging, misinformation is pretty rampant out there, and opinions are often presented as facts. I mean, I kind of like to present my opinion as a fact. I don't know if I'm the only one. But today we really want to find a sure footing in our own lives. That's really where it starts, is right here, right here. So we want to develop that foundation. And for those of us who follow Jesus, the Bible is a sure foundation for truth. And when we were talking the other day, Troy, you explained like just such a great process for really finding healing, discovering, truth. And I would love to just start out by, finding that process, like where does that start? And so I'll just kind of throw it back to you and you can get us started.
I'd say what's different about what I do in particular is that it's spiritually integrated largely. I
Okay. Yeah.
work with people of, all walks of life and love doing that, but it's really easily integrated with, I think, with scripture
Yes.
and the truth that we find there, right? You shall know the truth and the truth shall set you free.
That's
Uh,
right.
and so
Yeah,
that's
that's a
kind of,
great way to look at it. Just when you are working with people who are following Jesus, then using this model to integrate the scriptures and the truth of Jesus, it seems very intuitive. I think is a good way to put it when you were
yeah.
talking to me about it.
And even as believers, one of the things that happens is we often tend to resist grace. Like we might show it to others,
Right.
but this is just an example, but to ourselves, we resist applying that grace to self.
Right.
And this process kind of can even help with that, right? To identify,
Okay.
what am I really thinking,
Okay.
about me, and how is that affecting my life and my relationships? There are typically actions, reactions, behaviors that are troubling people that bring
Mm,
them in. What
okay.
it might be a couple that's clashing, right? It might be an individual who's really struggling with anxiety. Um, and so I have a little graphic that I use.
Okay, yeah, let's pop that up on the screen because I think that's so helpful. When people can see something visually, then it really kind of comes home, really comes home to them. So the
Yeah,
first step is I notice things that I do. So what is
yeah. There's like this connectivity here, right? The
right?
first circle, if you're looking at it, the one on the far left says the things that I do, right?
Okay,
The one in the middle says the things that I think, right?
okay,
And the one on the far right is what I need to know to heal. What usually brings folks in to see a guy like me, right,
mhm,
is what's in that first box, the things that I do, the behaviors, the feelings, the challenges like to
okay,
relation.
right,
Um, I call these protective actions and reactions. And other things, some of this is like may seem very obvious, and other aspects of it a little counterintuitive. But for
okay,
example, from my perspective, anxiety can be the result of this protective part of us, right?
right. Yeah.
Even depression,
Mm,
right? Um, we could, some of the more obvious things would be like substance use, right? Like
okay.
medicating ourselves, numbing ourselves out. That could include food, that could include sex, that, all kinds of
Yeah.
things, right?
Could anger almost be like a protective behavior because you're kind of like lashing out so that people don't come close to you, or I don't know, just wondering.
Absolutely. That's
Okay.
actually a really good point.
Uh-huh.
Um, this part of it has the lay of the land, right? And
Yeah.
it is always scanning the horizon for threat.
Mm,
And so that can be anger with some people.
yeah.
Also, like, for example, in a marriage, isolating from, pulling
Mm,
away from,
yeah.
right?
Withdraw.
Right.
Yeah.
And what will happen usually, like in a couple or in a family situation, protective parts are banging off of each other. They're
Right. There's
clashing.
that clash. One person is maybe angry, the other person's like, I'm out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're like not even real. A lot of the times, I mean, if you know, some of this just comes from personal experience too. You
Mhm.
know, a lot of times we're having these arguments or these conflicts, whether it's with others or it's internal, and we're not even dealing with the real thing, right?
Yeah.
It's just the
Right.
reaction to something that's going on, you
Right.
know.
Right. It's not,
Uh,
it's the, maybe it's, you didn't do the dishes, but it's really, there's another thing under here. Yeah.
and so one of the things that I found to be transformational really is when people's awareness is turned on,
Mm,
they can identify the protective actions and reactions in themselves.
okay. Yeah. Yeah.
And because that's the first one of the first steps in the process of being able um, to stop ourselves.
Hmm.
I'm a very visual person, so I often
Yeah.
identify. I think of like a waterfall, right? And
Okay.
you go upstream of the waterfall, right? You can get out of the water there. You know,
Right.
the closer you get to the waterfall, you know, you're going over, right?
Yeah. It's a
And
little
so
tough to stop yourself right before you're going in.
you're
You're
going over the
gonna,
edge.
yeah, it's pretty much happening. Yeah.
But if I am aware, if I start to have this awareness, this is a protective action in me, right?
Hmm.
I can get out of the current quicker.
Yes. And really, it's about the self awareness, not so much you being like, oh, I'm going to be aware of your protective behaviors.
Yeah,
That's where we
exactly.
probably go awry, but really taking responsibility for our own behaviors and how that is impacting our lives.
Absolutely. The one thing I will say that it can do, though, when we are aware of our own protective part, let's
Mhm.
say, I'm thinking of, let's say, me and my wife, right?
Okay.
If we, she and I, we're having a conflict about something, which, is common, right?
Yeah.
And I know that I have protective parts and she must have them too, right?
Hmm.
Then I can use grace when reacting.
Yes. Okay.
Um,
You just become more aware and acknowledging that you can have empathy for someone else because you're starting to have it for yourself. So it's easier once you have it for yourself. I feel like it's easier to have that grace for other people.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Here's a kind of a unique example. Like sometimes I'll deal with someone who's lost a loved one, right?
Mm,
And feelings of sadness, blunted emotions, you
yes.
know. For example, that can be a protective reaction because we feel like if we move on with our lives, if we feel happy, then
Mhm.
we're betraying that person, right? And so we hold
Okay.
on to that where we're protecting ourselves, and
Yeah,
maybe
I
that.
never thought of it like that. That's true. So it's like, we think sometimes that these concerns are just under the area of like, oh, I have maybe a mental illness or I'm struggling with, substance use or whatever, but this really affects pretty much every part of our life. This area, this can fit in there even if there's grief or we're struggling with transition in our life. There's a lot of um, pieces that can fit into this things I do, these protective behaviors. Yeah, that's really
Absolutely,
insightful. Mhm.
absolutely.
And so once we recognize it, and that just so everyone knows, the graphic will be, we'll pop it up now and then, but it'll be also in the notes. So, if you
Cool.
want to do this exercise on your own and kind of, start to work through this, you can. Then, of course, you can contact Troy if you want to meet
Absolutely.
with him, and we'll put his contact information in there. So the next step is things I think. So let's
Yeah,
kind of get
talk
into
about
that.
that. So what I find is these things are all connected in these circles, right? There are arrows connecting them. I started asking folks what was their fear. What was the fear that was deep inside, right? That deep concern of their heart.
Yeah.
And what I would even be, I don't like to say always, but it's like 99% of the time, what I get back is statements like this. Well, I feel like I'm no good. I
Mm,
feel like I don't measure up.
yeah.
I feel like my spouse thinks I don't measure up. I feel like, but what I stumbled across is that it's largely identity based. And
Okay.
I have a pastor friend who says this. This is one of those this model is one of these things where pieces just fall together over time,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
My friend says it this way. He says, the enemy, right? And I'm speaking of Satan, our enemy as believers, right, is
Right.
always attacking the image of God in man.
Right. Yes, because really when we don't know who we are or that we, that our identity, our core identity is a reflection of God in us, then that changes everything. It does.
Absolutely,
It
it
changes
does.
how we see ourselves and others. So that's a huge that's all a huge win if we, can overcome that and see ourselves differently.
Absolutely. Okay, our enemy is very focused and precise, I believe,
Mhm.
in his aggression against us. And so in John chapter 8, Jesus is talking, right? And he's telling these Pharisees, he's telling them,
Mhm.
you guys reject me because you're the children of Satan, basically. You can read this in John chapter 8, starting around verse 34, 35, something like that.
Okay.
And he said, he's the father of lies. He's been lying from the beginning. And when he lies, he speaks his native language. And so I'm reading that
Wow.
one day, and I think,
Right.
who's he lying to? Satan. Is he lying to God? Well, he probably tries. I don't know. That's a guess, but
Right, like Jesus in the wilderness, he
yeah,
lied to him there,
twisting,
right?
right? I
Mhm.
think he largely is lying to us about us. He's lying to us about others. He's lying to us primarily about God and truth, right?
Right, yeah.
And there's this reason why, you know, because he starts when we're young and he
Mhm.
starts injecting lies regarding our identity. Sometimes the adults, our caregivers that raise us, they're hurting as well. They're
Right,
broken. They
yeah,
make choices. They do things that speak regarding our value.
right.
And we begin to, how I phrase this, we begin to think these are truths about us that
Mm.
we're just running from.
Yeah, like, if I can outrun this by the things I do,
Hmm.
then, somehow but that like, the things you doesn't change the things that you think really intrinsically, and so that's where
So
the problem is.
if I'm thinking, hey, I don't measure up as a man, for example, right?
Right,
And my wife is offering me some type of maybe unsolicited uh, criticism,
okay,
that can touch something off in me,
right.
right? That the protective part of me that's fight. So, and then this is something I have to say, and probably should have said earlier. This protective part of us is always standing in defense of this hurting part of us.
Okay, that's a really good point. The protective part of us is standing in defense of the hurting part of us.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, because it will touch it off. That's like you'll see sometimes. Like one model of therapy talks about stonewalling in
right.
relationship, right?
Yeah,
So
Gottman. Mhm.
yes, that's right,
Yeah,
Dr. John Gottman. And stonewalling, in my opinion, is a protective action or reaction.
right,
I don't feel safe. Maybe I don't. These are just what ifs here, but
right.
uh, maybe I'm not sure what you think of me.
Yeah.
Um, Sue Johnson and her model, EFT talks
Mhm.
talks about what she calls demon dialogues, which
Mm,
I find to be extremely intriguing because she doesn't, from what I can tell in her books, doesn't engage in spiritually integrated therapy, and
right.
yet she has identified there are these dialogues that happen in our minds.
That aren't true, right?
Right. Yes,
Yeah.
they're tweaked by our understanding of self, our
Mhm.
and that is always under attack.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, so it's like and what it says if we can put the graphic back up on the screen, it's an assault on the self-esteem. is what it, so really, if people can think about the things that I think, it's the lies about value, and it's an assault on the self-esteem. And so once you start to identify those, and you can print this off, we'll put it as a PDF on the in the notes, then you're more aware when those thoughts come up, like, okay, what's this? Maybe I can challenge this lie.
Absolutely. That's a great point. That's the
Mhm.
word that's coming to mind, and that I will share with clients too, is externalizing. It
Yeah,
allows us to externalize it, to say, okay, what if this thought really doesn't come from me? What if this is not true? What if this is a lie? What if I do have some value?
right.
What if I can learn and grow? What if I do have
Exactly.
purpose? You
Yeah.
know, um, and so that often will help. That will help that protective part of us to stand down, and that's where we're starting to get into the truth, right?
Yes.
How truth helps us to heal.
Right. And so that's the third part of the process, is the things that I know to heal. And, you really do, you still need to identify what you're doing with your protective behaviors and the things that you're thinking, so that you can move to that third part of, okay, what are the things that I, you know, need to know to heal? So what does that look like when you're talking with
Yeah,
someone?
that's a good question. So kind of the flow will often look like I begin by working with the person, just talking to them about protective parts, and hey, these things exist, and
Uh-huh.
and maybe for that first week or two, it's just practice being a little more aware that you have this part of you, right?
Mhm.
And at some point, the conversation moves inward. You know
Mhm.
what? When you experience that protective part now, do some inner exploration and ask yourself, what is it that you're really concerned or afraid of?
Mhm.
What is it that you're afraid is true? So, our protective actions point really toward the existence of fear in our heart and mind,
Right.
right?
Okay.
It activates our sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight, right? These
Yes,
these fears do. Um,
exactly.
and so when we realize, okay, now I have a fear, and when we're starting to get down to the heart of it now, I will ask folks, I'll say, what is it that you need to know? If you knew this thing,
Mhm.
then your fears would be assuaged, right? And the
Mhm.
protective part of you could step back. Um,
That's pretty powerful, because I don't think that when you've always been believing something about yourself that's untrue, I it just stops there.
right.
So the encouragement that something can change, you can challenge these automatic, thoughts that you're having, that you've always been having. That gives a lot of hope that there's a pathway toward healing. And so, what are the things that you need to heal? So, let's say I'm believing, kind of like what you said,
Mhm.
that I'm not enough. That was one of
Yeah.
the statements I think
So
you
I
made.
would say part of the process is just creating that opportunity and that space for the person to recognize it and articulate it themselves. Like,
Mm,
I could be sitting there with them, and having walked through this process with handfuls of people, I could go, I think this could be it. But I'm not really doing them a service by going, hey, I think this is your problem. That's
okay.
not cool for me to do that. But
Yeah.
and it's not helpful, but what's helpful is when they start the inner exploration and they hit that place where they go, I think I just need to know that I'm loved, for
Yes.
example.
And I
Right.
think that's a good point. It's not, an external person can say, but I do love you, or you are loved, or God, even God loves you. But until you can kind of name it for yourself, sometimes it's not completely real, or,
Yeah. And to the
yeah,
point that, honestly, that's a really good thing you bring up,
yeah.
because to the point that can actually activate the protective part,
And they're
because
getting
the protective
then they're
part is
mad.
always asking, right?
Yeah.
What if the lie is true? So if you just give what appear to this protective part of us, it feels like platitudes.
Mm, yeah.
And so it's
It's
like,
safe.
well, And so they'll start resisting. You'll be telling them, no, you are great. You have all this potential. And they're like arguing the case against themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I've seen this happen. This is,
Yeah.
this is so true. Right.
I've done this myself, where, people will like compliment you or whatever. And you resist it,
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
And you wonder why, if it's difficult for you to receive a compliment, then I think there is a question there. Why is it difficult?
right.
Why am I having that thought? So even that can say, well, what truth am I believing, or what lie am I believing about myself?
Yeah.
If I can't even receive a compliment that someone's trying to give me. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I stumbled across something I was reading one day, and I was reading a book about, it was like a public relations book from the 30s, actually.
Oh, wow.
And it was just a PDF book online, and I was reading
Yeah.
it, and I stumbled across this chapter on propaganda. And this I thought was interesting, and it connects to this model.
Yeah.
So this author, this is back where there were just newspapers, but this
Okay.
guy was talking about how media will use propaganda, and propaganda not always bad, like you need to brush your teeth or you get cavities, right? That's good,
Right. Okay.
right? But
Yeah.
but what happens is propaganda becomes a tool, and this was the phrase that caught my attention, that is used to take away the free will of people, to to control their choices, to control what they
Wow.
do. And I'm like, oh, a light bulb went off over my head. The
Yeah.
enemy, the enemy wages a propaganda war against self so that he can remove our free will and keep us headed in a path of destruction.
Right.
Where we
Right.
resent ourselves. We don't,
Mhm.
when on the other end of this, we have Jesus Christ, right? Who is the way, the truth, and the life, right? Who's
Mhm.
come, the light, the Lamb of God, who's come to set us free, to help
Right.
us find our true self
Mhm.
in Him, right? And that's night and day difference.
Yes. Basically what you're saying is it is like the whole propaganda thing happens because even when people are trying to tell you the truth, you've already bought into this propaganda. So it's like you have to identify the lie. You have to, it's almost like a deprogramming
Yes.
that happens in this process.
And
Uh,
people are in different places with this. Like
right.
some folks will be like, they'll experience this conversation and they'll have these realizations as they're exploring it internally, and they'll be like, whoa, I get it. Yeah, these are lies I've been believing, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Um, and and then some folks, depending on the kind of life they've had and the mistreatment they've experienced, this is a lot more ingrained, right? And
Right.
and so it doesn't look like us having like a conversation or two and all is better. It
Right.
looks almost like just learning to rethink how we see ourselves,
Hmm.
in the world. And this is honestly for us as believers, I
Hmm.
think this is part of our sanctification process.
Yeah. It's like Romans 12:2 of renewing your mind,
Yeah.
and it changes everything. But I think that sometimes we expect that to happen overnight, but especially when there's been trauma in someone's childhood, and there's a lot of healing that takes place um, that is incremental and happens in a lot of different ways. And definitely, I like that you point out that it's not just a conversation. Somebody can acknowledge, oh yeah, that's true, but then their brains need to change. And so I think the whole study of being able to do an MRI of the brain and see that our brains have that neuroplasticity. We know
We
that
can,
God created us for transformation. That is, you know, proven now scientifically. So we know that it can happen. And it's just that sometimes those ruts in our brains, in some people's brains, are a little bit deeper. So it takes longer. And so I think, just in closing, I want to encourage people that if you feel like it's taking, a while, if you've been in therapy for a couple of years, that's okay. It's okay. It took you a while to get there. If you're 35 and you've been in therapy for a couple of years, it took you, 33 years, of your life of ingrained way of thinking to get to that place. So you're unwinding some of those thought patterns. And I really like this process that, is a visual, representation of how we can have a pathway towards freedom. And the spiritual integration piece is beautiful because it's very, tangible that there is that way, that there is a way towards hope. And I always love to say things don't have to stay the way that they are today. So thank you so much, Troy.
You're welcome.
Appreciate you being here today.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Big thank you to His Heart for supporting this channel. If you want more information for you and those you love on mental health, go to mentalhealth.academy today.